The officially stated goal of virtually all central banks in the developed economies is price stability, which would mean 0% inflation. But the official inflation target is 2%. There are a few reasons for that, but one dominant reason is that 0% is too close to deflation, so the 2% serve as a buffer. But why are so many economists and politicians so afraid of deflation that they target positive inflation instead of price stability? They suffer from what I call deflationphobia.
The other concern I should mention is that inflation is very, very low, which you think is a good thing and normally is a good thing. But we're getting awfully close to the range where prices would actually start falling.
With inflation running way below central bank targets in most corners, clearly we are seeing rising risk of deflation, which could prove disastrous for the recovery.
I will first lay out the potential danger of deflation. Then I will systematically go through reasons why the fear of deflation is unfounded. The danger of deflation is that it could lead to deflationary spiral. The theory goes like this: if there is high deflation, people might postpone their consumption, i.e., stop buying things in expectation that they might get even cheaper. That would lead to lower consumption, which in turn would decrease the sales and profits of companies. They would have to cut wages of their employees and even lay off some workers. This means that people would have less money to spend and at the same time would be afraid to spend more than necessary due to fears for the future given the current crisis. Deflation would also make debt repayment more difficult, as the real value of debt would increase. If defaults were bad enough, it could trigger financial crisis alongside the economic crisis, worsening the latter, leading to an inevitable crash. This would indeed be bad. But how much should we be worried about this worst-case scenario? Well, not very much. There are very few examples that could even remotely be called deflationary spiral. The prominent example is the deflation in early 1930s after the Great Depression. Even then, the crisis started due to one of the largest asset bubble bursts in history. The deflationary spiral was at best a secondary consequence of a severe crisis that perhaps made it even worse, but definitely did not start it. I am not aware of a single instance where deflation by itself started a spiral without any prior economic meltdown. It wouldn't even make much sense for reasons I am about to show you. If the theory says that deflation might induce decline in consumption, we should explore such hypotheses in different categories of products and services, one by one. Let's first have a look at consumables. Those are goods intended for quick and regular consumption. The best example is food. Does anybody seriously think that people would postpone buying a banana because it might get cheaper by a cent in a year? Food is the type of commodity that when it gets cheaper, people buy more of it, regardless whether they expect it will get even cheaper. A majority of the items in a grocery store would be considered consumables. Another example is fuel. No one sane would claim that people would drive less when the fuel got cheaper just because it might get slightly cheaper in a few months. Another very similar category are utilities. They are also used regularly, so any decrease in price would spur more consumption rather than postponement. Examples of utilities are electricity, natural gas, water, internet connection, or phone plan. Saving electricity is not something likely after it gets cheaper, just the opposite. Okay, so what about durable and more expensive goods, such as cars or electronics? Here, postponing the purchase is more reasonable when further deflation is expected, but it is still very dependent on magnitude. People have what economists call positive time preference. Simply said, people prefer having things now rather than later. To illustrate this, imagine that you want to buy a $1,000 TV. Would you say that you will wait a year to buy it because it will cost $990? Probably not. So 1% per year deflation would not suffice in this case. Everyone has some degree of time discounting, but it is highly individual. It depends on the person's temperament and wealth, but it is also context dependent. With small purchases, the time discounting might be large. If you want to buy wine glasses, for example, you probably would not wait a year to buy them, even if you knew they will be 20% cheaper in a year, because those 20% will probably be unnoticeable in your budget. With technology and other goods where the novelty is important, the discounting may also be high. Just remember that many people are willing to buy brand new expensive smartphones, even though they will be significantly cheaper once the new model comes around, and they know it. When considering mild deflation, such as 1% per year, the positive time preference will be higher for almost all people and all items, so even among durable goods, there should be no meaningful drop in consumption. Next, we have this small category of gifts, which is perhaps a special case of time preference. Birthdays, Christmas, and similar occasions are a purchase deadline for gifts, so you cannot postpone it. With high inflation, one can say that people will opt out for cheaper gifts to compensate. Again, with deflation, the opposite will likely happen. We haven't yet covered services, which constitute the majority of GDP in modern economies. But prices in services tend to be much stickier, especially downwards, so it is perfectly possible that there would be mild deflation in prices of goods and price stability in most services. Moreover, the relationship of consumption and deflation is the same as with goods, so let's explore services in one fell swoop. Firstly, there are services that people purchase on regular basis, which would be the equivalent to consumables. Examples include eating out in a restaurant, getting a haircut, a massage, or house cleaning. Also, most transport-related services, such as public transport, cabs, or delivery. In this category are all subscription-based services, such as gym membership or streaming. You can ask yourself whether you would buy more or less if those got cheaper. Then you have services that you just cannot postpone or go without, for example, repairs. No one would wait a year to call a car mechanic or a plumber because they might get a few % cheaper. A necessary surgery belongs in the same category. You also cannot postpone hiring a tax advisor, and you certainly wouldn't cancel or downgrade your insurance when it gets cheaper, just because it might get cheaper still. Same thing with childcare. There are a few services that could theoretically be postponed and where the savings might be non-negligible, such as house remodeling, plastic surgery, or an expensive vacation, but even there, the deflation would have to be large enough to override the positive time preference. So far, we assumed that people expect that the deflation will continue into the future. However, this is by no means given. Depending on circumstances, people might expect that the deflation was an exception and anticipate inflation in the near future. Such expectation might motivate people to buy even sooner than they planned, in fear that the goods will get more expensive soon. So this situation would be a consumption booster and not vice versa. So this is my final verdict on the deflationary spiral.
So bullshit! All of it!
The mainstream got it exactly backwards. Deflation is a consequence of low consumption, not the cause of it. Consumption goes down during a crisis because people are afraid to spend due to uncertainty, not because they want to wait for a better deal. The sellers then drop prices in an attempt to prevent consumption from falling even further. Expecting consumption to drop in reaction to deflation by itself is imagining the population as day traders speculating on asset prices. But consumption goods and services have totally different nature, as I tried to show here. Yes, total price collapse, i.e. hyperdeflation, could be disastrous, just like hyperinflation. Yes, both deflation and inflation have their trade-offs and will benefit some while hurting others. But this deflationary spiral apocalypse is just a scary tale, stemming from misunderstanding of the human psychology. In the next video, I will talk about the trade-offs of deflation, especially focusing on debt, which would be a much more serious challenge in a deflationary environment. But if you see a mild deflation predictions, don't panic. Just enjoy the fact that for once, your money is not losing its value.